2. Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST and Baltimore Positive. No one more positive than the crew we got gathered today. We're at Jennings Cafe. We're at Yomps, and we're in Catonsville.
I don't even know where to start. Reverend, I don't even know where to start. I thought they had burgers and crab cakes. Who knew?
And that's just a single portion.
I've started on the corner of the lasagna here. And,
might be the biggest piece of lasagna I've ever seen. Jennings Cafe in Catonsville,
I told him I didn't need a whole piece. He's like, it's portioned.
Right.
I'm like, for who? I mean, what's going on
That's
here?
a family of 4 there.
Now, listen,
homemade.
We're out with the good doctor, the Reverend Al Hathaway. We're not allowed to call him Al. We call him, but
we're getting an education.
We are absolutely, and I want to jump off on something you said because I know Don's going to take the whole segment over.
Okay.
One second, but I want to get your thought on this. You said something about when you looked at Gwynn Oak, what you saw there wasn't offensive to you. You were going to overcome, you know. And I think that a lot of times, whatever happens to us, whatever that challenge is, it's the meaning you put to it.
Yes,
and literally the belief that you have about it and the meaning that you put to it that then puts you on a why, that you're going to take the right path or the wrong path or the good path or the ugly path, whatever that is. And I think the people who are evolved and find some happiness take something and put different meaning to that.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. I think one of the, I really have to be thankful that I was grounded in a faith tradition that was about social justice, and it also taught us that education was a passbook. I mean, that is really when as I reflect back now, I realize that formation has really shaped me and shaped my perspective on life, even in terms of my family. That has been the influences on my family. But what I have to recognize was that caused us to feel as if there was some barrier, that you had the capacity to overcome that barrier. And in the overcoming of that barrier, it did not mean that you had to destroy. It meant that you had to build a larger bridge. And that's the learning, that's the training that I came up on. You got to keep in mind now, here I told you about Union Baptist Church, but Union Baptist Church has always been on the cutting edge of social change in Baltimore City. I mean, it began in 1852, right? In 1865, think about this, 1865, the members of Union Baptist Church create the first historic black college and university in the state of Maryland, Bowie. And it met on its campus, and it met in downtown Baltimore City. So here you had persons just really out of the Reconstruction period launching what we now know as Bowie State University there in 1865. Man, I look back at that kind of legacy and history, and it says to me that you shouldn't get bitter, you shouldn't get angry, you should work to overcome.
Well, how do young people, what a message, it's almost a billboard. I want to talk about the HBCUs because that's a passion of yours. Now I see why when you talk about your church's history with Bowie. How do young people react to you when you share that message? Do they look at you as just some old guy out of touch?
Crazy old man?
Yeah. Or do they go, I get it, Rev?
I think there's a big disconnect between my era and this era, and I have to look at the thread, the messaging that comes out of Madison Avenue per se. Just think that is that the messaging that we received was keep on pushing, Curtis Mayfield. There's a train coming.
People get ready.
Yeah, people get ready. You understand? I mean, that was the message.
The impressions. We're going to do a whole movie. Go ahead.
Reach out and I'll be there.
Exactly.
Right. Come on, man.
Exactly.
Right.
So if you think about that messaging which attracted your ear, became the language that you spoke, was very affirmative and positive messaging. Now, if you think about my young people now, the messaging that they receive is very crass, coarse, and very negative. And that has impacted their spirit. So here I come talking a positive message. It's almost a disconnect because they hear negative influences and they believe that they're not able to overcome them. They believe that they have to attack them. And that's
what goes back to beliefs. You keep saying,
exactly.
What do you believe?
Exactly.
What do you wake up every day thinking it's good, or do you wake up every day thinking it's bad?
Exactly. So I see that as I move out and I interact with young people, others in the community. And I realize that that's a barrier that I have to overcome, even in my perspective to them. And the only way you can do that I've found, is that you've got to be relational. Meaning that I have to realize, and I do realize, that I'm the griot, the old man in the village. Hey, y'all can come talk to me. Whatever it is that you got on your mind, whatever your situation is, I will be a listening ear.
How many of these children don't have anyone else that they don't?
Oh my goodness!
When they come, when you say that to them, that's a lifeline. They don't hear that all day, right? They don't. Do they hear that once a month? That you can come to me, you can come to me and be honest with me.
Well,
that's tough for any child anywhere, right?
I have to place this context, and I have to recognize this, that the family structure that I grew up in is not the family structure that is of the day. We had strong male influences. Now, hey, wait a minute. I mean, I look back at family. I was blessed. My father, my mother, I grew up in an intact family. But I remember families where there were father figures that were there. I never knew that they weren't married, but there were figures, father figures, male figures in the household. Many times now you don't have male figures in the household, and as a result, I think that has diminished some of our understanding of that cohesiveness of a family unit, which is the building block. The only reason why I'm of success now is that I can look back at my grandparents, my parents, and understand that they gave me a foundation upon which I stand. I'll never forget, I was talking to a young man, he was a parole and probation, and he said, I had a caseload of 35 individuals. I said, wow. He says, you know what, Al, he said, out of that 35, 33 of them did not know their fathers. And so, wow. so that impact of not having that male imagery is a difference now that I did not experience when I came up. There were always men in the household. You know, I didn't never looked at their license to know if they're married, but there always were men in the household. And there were men who would correct you when you were moving about.
A true guardian.
I hear that common theme.
Exactly.
I hear that common theme all of the time about the neighborhoods back in the late 50s and early 60s. That, as cliche as it sounds, it takes a village. Yeah. That street was a village.
Oh, it was real.
Right? Mrs. So-and-so and Mr. So-and-so, they had an eye on you.
All the time. And so I take you through. I'm in Shipley Hill now. I'm in West Baltimore. We're integrating this once white community now.
Pigs are coming down.
Oh, yeah. That was the most amazing thing. They were actually running the pigs to mangers, and that was part of the social entertainment.
I'm just letting you know I'm listening.
Oh, yeah. That was part of the – and your mangers are still there today.
Right.
Now, keep in mind now, I'm in West Baltimore. Around the corner is the Utz potato chip factory.
Well, that smelled good.
That was a business sitting right in the community. And you knew people who worked there, who brought excess popcorn and potato chips and whatnot home.
But they had jobs.
Exactly. Then you had another gentleman who had an amazing impact on me, a Jewish gentleman that I always call his name. His name was Miles Katz. Miles Katz ran the Betsy Ross Packing Company. The Betsy Ross Packing Company was a supplier for White Coffee Pot. You remember those White Coffee Pot?
Oh, yeah. Coffee Pot Junior?
Exactly. Sure. Exactly. He was a supplier. That was one of my early jobs. And I never forget, I went to work there. He brought me in, and he made me a pot washer. And I never forget, no one wanted to be a pot washer. But this section, nobody really cleaned it. They would get the pots would come in. That was the food that went out. The pots would come in, and people would half clean them. If they didn't clean them, they'd throw them behind the sink. It was a messy area. I never forget, I had a young fellow, my partner Ernest. I said, man, I can't work in this mess, man. Let's take our time and let's clean it up. We put on, I think, WBB or one of those radio stations.
It's my first radio station, 1360.
That's it. And start blasting the music. And we
Rockin' Robin?
Yes,
Rockin' Robin. It's not Paul Fat Daddy Johnson.
Oh, no, you got it. and started cleaning that section to the point that Mr. Katz came and said, who are these people? And from there, I learned a very important thing. A honest day's work for honest day pay. And that has been a overriding value that I've learned over my life. But Miles Katz came to me, and he realized that I had organized the cleanup of that section. And he came to me and said, hey, man, you don't need to be a pot washer. and he made me a salad maker.
That was a promotion.
That was a promotion, but I wanted to be
How
a
much?
pot
5
washer.
cents or 10 cents more?
A little bit more. But that's what a salad. You know what a salad maker does? A salad maker sits at a machine, stuffs in onions, celery, and whatnot in a machine, and then it comes in the machine, it mixes it, cuts it, blends it up, and it's a big pot at the end, and it catches that. That was no fun. I wanted to be a pot washer because the pot washer had control of his environment. He also had goals that he could achieve, meaning that we're going to make sure that this is the cleanest section there. So, I mean, I just say to you that was my experience. But that was in a community. I walked to the job. My second job was there with the Terminal Van Lines. Terminal Van Lines wasn't too far from here. Terminal Van Lines was a moving company. And that was my next job. When I went there, I was too small to lift up the refrigerator.
That was going to involve you moving your back.
I was I was about 16, 17. I was about 15. I got a worker's permit. 15 going to 16. I was too small to be a heavy lifter. So what they made me was I was the person who would write down the inventory of what was in the household for the insurance purposes. So here I kind of learned responsibility. Hey, you've got to write down what is the inventory. We match that inventory with what comes off the truck that goes back into the house. The owner was signed for it, and I learned that at an early age.
And here's where George Young came involved, right?
Well,
getting the answers right, making sure that you did things the right way.
I can't even begin to tell you about the brilliant educators that was at Baltimore City College when we were there. George Younger being one. You mentioned. I mean. Now here's the thing. Here comes a vice principal, the first African American who was on the staff. It was a gentleman whose name was Pierre Davis. Now, Pierre Davis not only is the vice principal at Baltimore City College, he's in the Sunday school at my church. So, I mean, I'm stuck, right?
He's got you. He's got his eye on you.
I'm stuck. He's at my church. Mr. Davis is at my church. Now he's at the school, so now I can't act up. I mean, it was really a interesting. But what it showed was, and I hope what I'm communicating you, was that the community was
looking out for you.
Exactly. It was a community.
It's so interesting when you mention that, and boy, it makes perfect sense. Next week we're having Sarah Heminger from Thread on.
It's amazing.
And everyone says
that's why we're having her on.
And I told Nessa we've been researching her.
Yeah.
And what she is creating.
Right.
Is what you're describing.
Exactly.
She's saying
exactly.
You can't do it alone.
That's right.
You need a family, and if you don't have it, we'll create it.
Exactly.
And we're going to stick it out with you for 10 years.
Yes.
Amazing.
Very important. I mean, if you think about it, I mentioned about you, Dr. Samuel Banks. Dr. Samuel Banks, my 7th grade teacher, was my friend throughout his whole life. And mentored me and consulted me.
Kind of sounds similar to
Exactly.
Yeah.
See, education and educators learn from you, and you learn from them.
Right. Well, Ron Shapiro last week, Ron challenged us and everybody else in Baltimore City. His son, very much involved in the National Mentor Program. Mm-hmm. Ron made the point, and when I think of what Sarah's done at Thread, I think, boy, if we put it on a scale, what Ron's talking about. Ron said, "I challenge everyone. Let's create 10,000 mentors in Baltimore City.
Right.
Let's not accept Baltimore City the way it is.
Exactly.
Let's recruit 10,000 mentors." Right. So if you're out there listening, you want to get involved, contact the Reverend. Let's get involved, and let's get 10,000.
Well, you think about it. You got Sarah Hemingway with the Thread, and now you've got Wes Moore, who's promoting our mentor.
Right.
You know, I think the opportunity to mentor is very significant. Very important.
Let me reset here. We got the good doctor, Reverend Al Hathaway here. We're at Jennings Cafe. I'm about to crush this lasagna. Don Moeller. Don, I want you. You had all of these notes, and you had somewhere you wanted to go here in the second segment. So.
The Reverend is taking us there. I want to, when you talk about important people in your life, not all of our listeners, because many of them are younger, but some that are older will remember really a historic figure in this state. You talked about Union Baptist being at the forefront of so many issues.
Yes.
Reverend Dobson. Well, before we go there, just hand
crab
it over.
Cakes are coming.
I mean, come on. It's getting silly here at Jennings. Now, look, we're gonna feed the Reverend. lasagna.
I got too much light on the crab cake, but that's yeah.
If you have not been to Jennings Cafe in Catonsville,
we're 5 minutes from a break.
We're gonna
eat this in 5 minutes.
We're gonna let the Reverend.
I can tell the way this looks that this is right.
So the Reverend's going to get ready. But before we go to a break, important person,
yes,
Reverend Fernand Dobson. You mentioned, I'm going to jump back to Gwynn Oak, and I remember Reverend Dobson being front and center in that.
Yes, he was.
And I'm a little, at that time, 13-year-old kid up the street here at St. Mark, not thinking one way or another about the Catholic Church. Mm-hmm. And I can remember my mom watched the news religiously, and I remember at night seeing this coalition of faith-based leaders leading protests and marches to Gwynn, and I'm seeing Catholic priests and Jewish rabbis and African-American ministers. And there are moments that when you look at your life, and I always think if I ever write anything about what mattered, I looked at that and I thought, wow, something is happening here that's special. And there was a twinge of pride in me that the Catholic Church that was important to me as a 13-year-old kid
took the right side of the issue.
Was on the right side of the issue saying, this is wrong. So educate us a little bit about Reverend Dobson and his influence on you and his influence in Baltimore.
It was amazing. When you think about Reverend Vernon Nathaniel Dobson, who captured this sense of social activism in the church, but also understood a sense of political empowerment, but did it in a way that he understood racial equity. He did not, even though he was a very proponent of African black power, he did not promote that to diminish any other sense of power. So he always taught us about personhood, always taught us about the value of the other. And your isness is caught up in someone else's oughtness, what they ought to be. Man, that's heavy stuff, man. You know what you mean? Your isness and your oughtness, you know? But what he did was he did that in a very practical way. He came in the Union Baptist Church as an assistant. First, he came in as the director of our Harvey Johnson Center. He had been in the probation department, and he came in to basically run a community center. At that time, Baxter Matthews, Reverend Dr. Baxter L. Matthews, he was a graduate of Yale Divinity School. He had come to Baltimore. He served from the 1940 to 1967. Here you got Vernon Dobson, who comes in. He serves from 1967 to 2007. He served for 40 years.
Kind of reminds me of the Pittsburgh Steelers. They only had 2 coaches.
Right. Well, you think about it.
And now you've been there for 12 or 13.
Yeah, 15 now.
15.
Yeah. So you've got 163 years, really 167 years of history, and they've only had 10 pastors.
It's Pittsburgh Steelers.
Right. Yeah. They only had 10 pastors. So Reverend Dobson comes in, and he comes in at that one under Baxter Matthews. We've got that activism of March on Washington. Reverend Dobson comes in. He's the organizing piece inside of that. He's the piece that says to us, wait a minute now, let us begin to look at how do we position ourselves in terms of political equity in Baltimore City. So you're moving now. He comes in now. He's passed in 1967. Now you've got the eruption of 1968, which is the assassination of Martin Luther King. Baltimore City is in a mess. Right? And here he comes with a unique kind of relationship with William Donald Schaefer. He comes in and becomes a voice of mediation. Emerging out of that, you get this figure coming on TV, challenging the general manager at WBAL at that time with a counterpoint. And we see him on TV. One of the first kind of TV personalities.
A regular show, correct?
Yeah, that ends up. First he starts in terms of a counterpoint to the position of the general manager, and then he evolves into a show that we then know as Look at It This Way. And Look at It This Way had Sam Daniels, who was the Grand Master for the Masonic Order, and you had Dr. Homer Favor, who was at Morgan State University, head of its Urban Studies program. So these minds sat there bringing in people, talking about the issues of the day, but also talking about solutions. Well, what happens now is that Reverend Dobson now is pastor of the church. Now, 68, we've gotten through that. And he begins to realize that we've got to be about political empowerment. 68, they come in, and we had a member of our church. His name was Dr. Gus Adair, Alvin Augustus Adair. He should be known inside of our history because he was the political strategist and the political mind behind Perrin Mitchell.
Oh.
Perrin Mitchell, of course, runs for a Congress. That was Friedel was the congressman at that time. So
Sam Friedel.
Exactly. Jewish community at that time. He runs 68. He doesn't win. Comes back. But they also run they run for judge. They run they break the barrier. 68, they break the barrier with Judge. And see, that's what happens.
We'll come back. We'll come back.
I'll get it. Right. I get it. So we win. So
we're not disrespectful. We're just getting old.
And the beauty about it, right, is that the mind just
and you can see him.
Yeah, it says he's right there. Joe Howard.
There you go.
So Joe Howard breaks through, and they get Joe Howard. So we win a citywide campaign. We decide a citywide campaign with Paul Chester, clerk of the court. Now we come back with Perrin Mitchell in 70, and they win in 70 with Perrin Mitchell. Now, you've got to think about this. Here you have a local group, and they call themselves the Goon Squad. Here you have a local group of clergy now that has a congressman during the time of Nixon in Congress, and you've got, at that time, about 20-some congressmen across the country. Amazing people. You got up in New York, you got the Adam Clayton Powell, you got these amazing people. And here come Perrin comes into that.
I guess Shirley Chisholm would have been part
Shirley
of that.
Chisholm was about that. But but this is the one piece that I want to tell you that people would not know. What we now know as the Congressional Black Caucus was not organized at that time. Perrin Mitchell organized the Congressional Black Caucus, and Dr. Gus Adair became his first executive secretary.
Wow.
So the organization across the country of the African American community arose out of this Goon Squad, out of this Perrin Mitchell, as they looked at how can we do progress in our country, so that they thought globally, because part of them took them into the whole South Africa and apartheid. So here I'm growing up with this amazing church in a neighborhood that taught me something else significant. It was act locally, think globally. And that's the piece that we miss now. People don't realize that a little pebble in the ocean here creates reverberations around the world. And so I learned that there. And Vernon Dobson, he taught us about education. He taught us about the importance of value of who you are, but he also taught us about justice in a real sense, that you could be advocates. Now, I get caught up in that. And really, I had an uncle in Richmond, Virginia, who was an activist in that same model. And during the 80s, he starts to sue because in Richmond, Virginia, they wanted to gerrymander Henrico County onto Richmond. And so my uncle down there, J. Wallace, Uncle Wallace Hathaway, J. Wallace Hathaway, has a group called a committee. And what they do is they resist that and are able to have the lines drawn back. Out of that, he runs his lawyer for state senate, and he runs a member of who was his family, a teacher, school teacher, who was a friend of his wife, Willie Dell, runs her for city council, and they win. In Richmond, around, this is now 80, 82, they win the city council seat. And at that time, the local mayor is elected by the city council. So Henry Marsh becomes the mayor. And then what happens is that's so serious. Serious stuff. Be quiet, serious.
Serious talking to the Reverend.
So then what happened, his lawyer was Doug Weiler. So Doug Weiler goes in the state senate. And so my colleagues up here in Baltimore, they know I'm down there working with my
future governor.
Exactly. They know I'm down there working with my uncle. They call me back to Baltimore. Reverend Dobson, Wendell Phillips called me back to Baltimore. And at this time, so this must be 72. At this time, they're now envisioning and imagining what they now call a citywide power organization that is built. and I come back to Baltimore to be on the organizing staff of Bill. So that was 76. So this is
now educate people. Bill's still a force
today,
right?
Mayor Schaefer's when
exactly.
you come back in 76.
Yeah.
But Bill is still.
Yeah. Now keep in mind now.
Right.
So I come back. Since it's 76, they elect the mayor down in Richmond. You get State Senator Doug Wilder that makes his ascendancy. Now they are planning now to run what they call COPE 83. They're planning for the election now. But then in 77, they come back, and I'm on the staff of Bill, Baltimore's United Leadership Development. Now, Rev Dobson said something to me that I never forget. He says, Sundays, the preaching is the gravy. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, that's the meat and potatoes. That's the work.
That's the work.
That's the work.
That's what do you call it? Chopping wood.
Yeah,
chopping wood, man.
That's the work. And so he I was always awestruck by his capacity to engage with people, to have conversations with people. People would call him on the phone. People would
and
come.
they always had a problem, right? They
Always
weren't calling it for tea.
They weren't
calling to say, what can I do for you?
It was a problem. It was a laugh. It was something. He was the mind of which brilliant minds rotated around. But he also had a sense of social justice. But what was amazing about his social justice, it was never bitter. Now, the amazing things you think about it. He understood the dynamic of our African American community. So he had alliances with Mr. Adams and all of his cohort of people, right? And they had alliances. and one of the things that he did was he wanted to have a grocery store in Baltimore City. And so he pushed for a grocery store. Congressman Mitchell was able to get funding for a grocery store, and they created what we call Our Supermarket. Our Supermarket was on the corner of Pennsylvania Avenue and Dolphin. It's now a Save-A-Lot. It was there. So this was him looking at, when you talk about food deserts, right. They looked at that long time ago.
Amazing. I was going to say,
and we still got the problem 50 years later.
50 years
still
later.
There.
Right. Because what happened was, he then had, you had Super Pride. And you had Charlie Burns with Super Pride, and that was growing, and they were supporting that effort to grow. But what happened was that we went from, remember what I said, act locally, think globally. What happened to our local communities is that now the globalization of economics starts to now become worldwide. So you get these international conglomerates that's now controlling food products. So instead of it being A&P, a local thing, now it's a national, international.
And they're only going to operate where they can make the most money.
Exactly. Well, the way you make money is that you buy as much as you can, and you sell it for. You buy as much as you can for the least you can, so that you can sell it for the most that you can. And so economics goes up because it becomes global, because I can buy a lot for little and sell to the local consumer. So he kind of taught us all about that. He taught us about political empowerment. He taught us also about the intersection between how do you live your faith? How do you live your beliefs in a way that, one, this is the word, you become a living epistle? How do you become the living Bible? How do you become, and Peterson in his book says, the word became flesh and lived in my neighborhood. How do you do that? And he taught us how to live your faith with honesty, with integrity, and to live it with a kind of persistency that it could go up against any force and do it in a very human way. I mean, you talking about some of the battles that he had with William Donald Schaefer were legendary, but they were friends. I mean, one of his major friends was Jim Rouse. And Jim Rouse, I never forget, Jim Rouse came to him. He had a vision for redoing Baltimore.
By the way, we've had a couple of Jim Rouse stories here. You know, the names.
We'll fill you in, right? Yeah. We'll fill you in on the Rouse's culinary delights. But go ahead, finish your story.
But this is the important story. So he comes to Vernon Dobson, and he says, Rev Dobson, and he comes to him, and he comes to Home of Favor. He's got a problem. He wants to build, like he had just built in Boston with his Fraley's Market, he wants to build a marketplace in the Inner Harbor. But the open space people were resisting anything being built on the harbor, right? And so he came to them. He came to Dr. Favor. Dr. Favor drafted a what became a resolution. And the question was, and I almost don't remember the letters, was you vote for one was for N, which would allow us to get the harbor, and O, you had to vote against O, which was open space. So we went through the community, vote for N, not for O, that kind of a thing. And as a result, they won, and as a result, you had the building of the harbor place, harbor place. But that came out of this intersection between the faith community, the African American community, as well as with corporate leaders who understood how do we create jobs, how to create employment.
Trust.
Exactly. But let me swing back. One of the most important things that we learned out of Bill, and the reason why Bill has this sustainability to this day.
It's amazing.
Right. You're talking about an organization started in 76, 77. Now you're talking about 2019, still strong, still vibrant. What it understood was that you did not organize around a charismatic leader. Everybody could be a leader. And the importance of everybody being a leader meant that you could have sustainability over time. The other thing it is that you had to learn and have organizational discipline. So he learned and he was able to communicate. Of course, the Industrial Areas Foundation kind of modeled his understanding around how do you run actions? How do you run campaigns? How do you identify the difference between a problem and a solution? And how do you then begin to do the kinds of things that moves a community forward? And it had to be ecumenical, had to be multiracial. I never forget one of the amazing personalities that I learned so much from was Monsignor Claro Dwyer. I don't know if you might know that name, but Monsignor Claro Dwyer was a Roman Catholic Monsignor. In Sparks, Maryland, the retreat center is named after Monsignor. He took me around and literally had me have meetings with the business leaders in Baltimore City. I had, and when I look back at my notes, I had over 257 meetings with business leaders in Baltimore City. During that period of time, I did over 3,000 individual meetings with individuals in their homes. So out of that, I've developed a real feel for the community and understanding of how do you sit down and have a conversation with somebody, and out of that learn self-interest so that you can have mutual self-interest. Out of having mutual self-interest, then you can have common goals. And if there's any problem that I see in this time, we don't take the time to sit and talk to people. We don't sit the time to listen to people. We don't sit and take the time to learn, as Reverend Dobson, their isness, so that we can move to an oughtness. What do we ought to be? And that's I got to really give Reverend Dobson. I was honored to follow him as a pastor of Union Baptist Church. I had the opportunity for a period of transition because I was there from 2004 till he retired literally in 2007, and then I was elected pastor of Union Baptist. And in many ways, I carry on. I mean, can you imagine a guy way back in 1966 saying that we got to make certain that we have a place of education for our children? And he, along with Perrin Mitchell, create the Union Baptist Head Start program. And now, some 53 years later, it's still going strong.
Well, we're gonna come back. We're going to start with Head Start.
We got to take a break.
We got to let the Reverend. We got to let the good doctor dig into the.
I'm going to call Steve Yampieri and tell me you have to reheat.
I could tell you this is a good crab cake when it's a lump.
Nestor, is it safe to say class is in session?
Yeah, we're learning. I say to some people, it's what you learn after you know everything. Oh, right. That really matters. Reverend Al Hathaway here, the good doctor, Don Moeller. We are in Catonsville. We're at Jennings. I got lasagna. I got crab cakes. I got pot roast. I got all sorts of things going on. We are WNST and Baltimore Positive. We're learning, eating, and living. Back for more right after this.